So this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcasting on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions on Wednesday, the 1st of November 2023. The first item that we will discuss is, of course, covered by the general theme of care, because the ongoing sessions of the COVID inquiry that have reportedly disclosed or heard various real stories about the incompetence, the callousness, the cruelty, the evilness personified by Boris Johnson, who was in post as the then incumbent, quote, Prime Minister at the expense of the United Kingdom. The embodiment of evilness, personification of evil that Boris Johnson is, has been reinforced with spectacular evidence that had until now not been publicly published, especially sourcing the evidence to the head of the domestic so-called civil service and the most senior advisor to Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings. And this is the sample of the headlines. Let's say the headlines, we shall be going through some of the headlines in the last 24 hours. So this is a live item on Sky News online, which is timed at 12:36 UK, which is 8 minutes ago, 11 GMT. And it says, Helen McNamara, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Ethics Chief, is giving evidence to the COVID inquiry following on from Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain. What's the text saying? Key points in the text that they have listed. We are in huge trouble. Former top officials' message to Johnson team revealed. Then Johnson, very confident UK would sail through. McNamara says there were no plans for what would happen if Prime Minister got ill. Marie Aurora McNamara painting clear picture of arrogant macho culture. Sunak has an awful lot to be proud of on COVID. Deputy Prime Minister says Cummings gave partial account in COVID inquiry. Pledge tracker. Is the Prime Minister keeping his promises? Live reporting by Ben Bloch. Cabinet leaks and If there is bad news, it will leak straight out via some fool. And there is absolutely an awful lot. 9 minutes ago, Mari Aurora, political correspondent, when asked about lockdown busting gatherings during the pandemic, Helen McNamara admits hundreds of civil servants and potentially ministers might well have been on the wrong side of the law when it comes to adhering to COVID restrictions. This will come as a shock to many who adhere to COVID restrictions stra- stringently, especially those who lost loved ones during the pandemic. The Partygate scandal punched a national bruise at a time when so many were struggling with the restrictions, whether that be not seeing sick or dying loved ones, those struggling with isolation and loneliness, children kept from school, or a loss of one's livelihood. And to hear this from one of the most senior civil servants in the government at the time will likely anger many who felt they sacrificed a huge amount to keep others safe. 18 minutes ago at 12:29 British Standard Time, there is 11:29 GMT. I find it hard to pick one day where the regulations were followed in Downing Street. Next, the inquiry lawyer turns to the series of rule breaking events that took place in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office while the country was under restrictions. Helen McNamara herself was fined by the Metropolitan Police for what the Telegraph reported was in relation to a raucous karaoke party at which there was a drunken brawl. The event has previously been reported to have been attended by about 20 people, including, briefly, Sir Mark Sedwill, then Cabinet Secretary and head of the Civil Service. Asked about the rule breaking gatherings, Miss McNamara says bluntly, they shouldn't have happened. This is critical of the response to media reports of these parties, saying, I don't understand at all why it was acknowledged that on a number of occasions, I'm sure Downing Street and the Cabinet Office sometimes didn't follow the regulations. With regards to distance and other regulations in Downing Street, she explains, I think that acknowledged them. I definitely wasn't partying in number 10. I was either at work or at home, she said. I think that acknowledging what had happened, acknowledging that some of it was a symptom of the situation, being honest about the fact that actually I would find it hard to pick one day when the regulations are followed properly inside that building. Miss McNamara said there was one meeting where we absolutely adhere to the guidance to the letter, the cabinet meeting, and everybody moaned about it and tried to change repeatedly. So I know how exceptional it was to really, really, really properly follow the guidance. I think that in retrospect, obviously, all sorts of things were wrong. In terms of the fines that were issued, she says that the line between what constituted rule breaking and what did not was not clear at that time. And hundreds of civil servants and ministers may, in retrospect, feel they were on the wrong side of the line. Timed at 12:28 UK time, 11:28 GMT, again by political correspondent Mari Aurora, Cummings' apology for misogynistic messages likely to fall on deaf ears. Helen McNamara utterly refutes Dominic Cummings' claims that he did not contribute to a misogynistic working environment in number 10. The former senior official describes WhatsApp messages written by Dominic Cummings about her as violent and misogynistic and says she is disappointed that Boris Johnson did not call Mr. Cummings up on his offensive language when talking about her, and she believes it was miles away from what is proper or decent or what the country deserves. Yesterday, Mr. Cummings apologized several times for his language, but he categorically refused to admit misogyny. But with WhatsApp calling for Miss McNamara to be handcuffed and escorted out of the building, and reference to dodging stilettos from that cunt, Mr. Cummings's apologies will likely fall on deaf ears. 31 minutes ago, 11:21 GMT, horrible to read Cummings's messages about me, former top civil servant says. Yesterday, the COVID inquiry heard from Boris Johnson's chief advisor Dominic Cummings, and WhatsApp messages were revealed in which he used foul language to describe Helen McNamara, she posted at 9:33. Broadly, she tells the inquiry there was definitely a toxic culture in number 10, Downing Street. Asked if Mr. Cummings was part of the problem, she says that Mr. Johnson had offered her any number of permanent secretary jobs in order to leave the cabinet office, but she had objected on the basis that she did not want one of her colleagues to be moved on in order to create space for her. On the WhatsApp messages, Miss McNamara says the things that Mr. Cummings, having seen those messages, it is horrible to read, but it's both surprising and not surprising to me. And I don't know which is worse actually. She acknowledges that he was frustrated with her at the time, but adds that she was working in the service of the then Prime Minister. Nonetheless, she says it wasn't a pleasant place to work. She adds that it's disappointing to me that the Prime Minister didn't pick him up on the use of some of the violent and misogynistic language. 41 minutes ago, 11:13 GMT, it's clear many of those at the top of government witnessed the toxic culture in number 10. Political correspondent Mari Aurora. When asked about the culture of junior women being talked over, ignored, and excluded due to a macho culture in the government, Helen McNamara explains how she believes the female perspective with regards to policy was being overlooked during the pandemic. In her written evidence, she recalls women expressing their relief that she returned to work after being off ill, and she states it was obvious that there were hardly any women talking in important meetings which she regarded as highly unusual. She believes women were not being treated with adequate respect and were not being given the space to do their jobs properly, and that being overlooked had a detrimental impact on the workings of the government. Everyone was contaminated by ego, she said. Miss McNamara then sent an email to female colleagues saying she had concerns about a macho and egotistical environment and that it was having tangible consequences on policy making, such as areas like abortion and domestic violence. She said all the women had replied to her email and that they were glad she raised the issue. However, when asked if the culture improved, she depressingly admits that it did not. What this evidence lays bare is how many of those working in number 10 and at the top of government were witnessing and or contributing to a toxic work culture in number 10 and the cabinet office. And interestingly, Ms. McNamara makes it clear she does not believe the same culture would have existed under Theresa May. 10:55 GMT, an hour ago, bad behaviors from senior leaders tolerated and junior women talked over or ignored. So there is a lot of this. An ex official alarmed at absence of humanity in some government decisions. When asked what she meant in her written statement that too much of the decision making was being sucked into number 10, machine at the time, Helen McNamara admits being alarmed by an absence of humanity in several policy areas, one of which was how to deal with prisons during the pandemic. She explains public servants as well as individual prisoners were potentially being put at risk and that there was a lack of care or comprehension that it was the government responsibility to look after those people and protect them from COVID, as well as the families to which some of these prisoners might be returning to. She then goes on to outline in our evidence that there was a lack of care in all sorts of ways within Downing Street. For example, she says there was a lack of duty of care for those who worked in number 10, as it took 7 months after the pandemic started to get hand sanitizer in key locations in number 10 to stop people spreading the virus, not least to the Prime Minister at the time. At 10:47 GMT, McNamara, not surprising, lots of number 10 staff contacted COVID-19. Turning away from the Prime Minister's health directly, the inquiry's lawyer asks next about general health precautions. He brings up a part of Helen McNamara's witness statement, in which she writes about the faceless bureaucracy created by the Cabinet Office. She writes from the outset there is a failure to recognize that there was a duty of care for the people who worked in number 10 of the secretariat or the task force. So this is going on, this is quite a lengthy series of statements and comments. Essentially, all of these are consistent with the evidence of baby angel Geronimo about DEFRA and the cruelty and criminality that Boris Johnson personifies at every stage, every look, at every aspect of Boris Johnson's behavior contains evidence of his cruelty, lack of humanity, lack of care, lack of compassion, lack of the awareness of the duty of care. So we shall leave that for the time being for this broadcast, and the records will be there online, I think, accessible later. Now, going back to the private eye, issue number, it's a fortnightly issue number 1610, dated the fortnight 3rd of November to 16th of November 2023. And in the Rotten Boroughs column, there is a report about Croydon Council. And we shall come to the Croydon Council in a second. So we have said in the introduction, editorial introduction, the state of local councils in England, as exposed in the latest evidence of Croydon Council failing to provide bus shelters for the people of Croydon. This is the one that we are referring to. I'll check the page and then read the bits that are pertinent. Okay. So this is the issue of the private eye on page 15, the Rotten Boroughs. The Rotten Boroughs column. It's a one-page column, Rotten Boroughs. And on average, it has been about 7 items, about 7 different English borough councils. So this one on page 15 is, the first one is Gimme Shelters. This is the one that is about Croydon. It says, bus passengers in South London face a third winter exposed to the wind and rain, thanks to the latest business adventure gone wrong at cash-strapped Croydon Council. Now, this is a completely dishonest, incompetent, ignorant, and corrupt column, because whoever is actually given the responsibility or charge of compiling this is a very dishonest individual, because the reference to the current mayor, the Tory mayor, Jason Perry, and to chief executive, Catherine Carswell, only happens in the last paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 paragraph long, but the executive mayor, the elected mayor, and the chief executive, Catherine Carswell, are only mentioned in the and they're not criticized, just a mention. As if making a mention of these does the job of holding them to account or explaining to the reader the role that each has been playing for the persistence and growing incompetence and corruption in Croydon Council. Most importantly, the private lie has not examined at all the imposition of the elected mayor post on a council that was bankrupt, corrupt, and incompetent and unfit for purpose for several years. Instead of examining the existing London elected mayor boroughs, Newham, Tower Hamlets, Hackney, and Lewisham, private law just added So this is a resumed connection after turning off the computer, and line seems to have remained active. Now, going back to the role of the private lie in really incompetently covering the corrupt Croydon Council, particular attention should be paid to the role of Catherine Carswell. Now, Catherine Carswell, on the evidence of our behavior over the last, let's say, 30 years, can be reliably described as being probably the craftiest and the most opportunistic, the greediest, holder of the post. Now, there is this biography of Carswell on the government.uk website, and it says Catherine Carswell joined the civil service in September 2012 as Director General, Civil Service Reform. Prior to that, she was a chief executive of 4 local authorities. Authorities is a word for councils, and has worked in local government for over 25 years. And career highlights the list: Chief Executive of Northamptonshire County Council, Chief Executive of Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council, Managing Director of Kent County Council, President of Solace. Now, that's an organization to which post holders like her belong, I think. Chair of the Audit Committee for the Department of Children, School and Families. Catherine has represented large governments. I'll read that again because I've misread one word. Catherine has represented local government on a number of government and national commissions, and has written and spoken extensively on public sector reform, leadership and change management. Previous role in government. Previous roles in government. Director General Civil Service Reform, 2012 to 2014. Now that is the bit the government website. It doesn't contain details of her career from 2014, in the last 9 years, let's say, up to now, when she's surfacing as the permanent. She manipulated her way to a permanent contract as chief executive of Croydon. And there is no criticism of her. There is absolutely so. In the latest news selection that is available on the Google search, Inside Croydon, 6 days ago, their report is the latest one about her. And Inside Croydon's heading, Mayor Perry's spending cuts should begin with his own cabinet. And there is this piece about Croydon commentary. This piece called Croydon commentary. Croydon commentary. Why is our cash-strapped council wasting 1.4 million over 4 years on extra allowances for cabinet members who have little power? Or spending another £400,000 over the same period on support staff for councillors at a time it is making £31 million in cuts to services for residents? Andrew Pelling Wright says it is time to axe the town hall luxuries. With cash-strapped Croydon Council looking for a further 31 million in cuts, while increasing its borrowing by 38 million, the Tory mayor needs to contribute some money from within the town hall to staunch the flow of red ink. Spending saved in town hall administration means fewer cuts to frontline services for residents. Official figures obtained from the council by a freedom of information request show that in reality Croydon's conservative mayoralty has not moved the dial on council staffing numbers. Perhaps Mayor Sperry's 15% council tax increase has relaxed the money discipline in Catherine Street. The council boasts of post-Labour stability, but what we have got looks more like stasis. Number of staff on the payroll at Croydon Council as of April this year, that is 2023, and this is the 1st of November 2023, is actually not much down from April 2019, when Tony Newman was council leader and Joe Negrani was chief executive officer. 4 years ago, according to the council's own figures, they had 3,293 staff on the payroll. By April 2023, the figure was down to 3,203, only 90 less. Council staff reached a peak of 3,570 in 2020 during that unhappy Newman-Negrani partnership. Of those job cuts that have happened, most came under Labour immediately after Negrani and Newman left the council. Figures for the number of highly paid directors and executive directors who are often on more than £150,000 per year are also informative. Catherine Carswell has 21 employees at director and executive director level, with 7 of them almost twice as many as Negrani on the highest executive level salaries. Whether it's a Labour or Conservative, no one has got a grip of the extensive budget line, of the expensive budget line of six-figure salaried senior officials. So while the number of frontline staff has gone down, the number of senior officials remains almost unchanged. And there is nothing in this piece about accountability at all. Nothing in this piece about the corruption. So even inside Croydon is not really rigorous enough, anywhere near rigorous enough that it should be. So, where do people go to seek redress against this kind of corrupt, wasteful bureaucracy such as Croydon? The so called local government ombudsman is as good as dead. So, local government ombudsman, let's see what the entry says. Its name is grand. Local government and social care ombudsman. That's a big one. Local government and social care ombudsman, legally the Commission for Local Administration in England, and formally known as the Local Government Ombudsman LGO, it claims investigates complaints from members of the public about councils and some other authorities and organizations providing public services in England. It also investigates complaints about registered adult social care providers. It is the last stage of the complaints process for people who have given the council or provider opportunity to resolve the issues first. It is a free service. Similar duties are carried out by the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales, Scottish Public Services Ombudsman, and the Northern Ireland Ombudsman. The current interim local government and social care ombudsman is Paul Najsarik, whose appointment commenced on 1st of April 2023. And it says councils do not have a legal obligation to comply with the local government ombudsman's recommendations, even those in a published report, though the ombudsman states that less than 1% of cases are not complied with in full. One task of taking a complaint to the local government ombudsman is that the complainant may run out of time to seek judicial review. So, this is a completely corrupt roundabout, and the judicial review is itself an obstruction. So, people don't have any real legal constitutional redress against council corruption, incompetence, and the latest official reports about the local government ombudsman was 18 years ago. House of Commons, 7th of April 2005. So it's a corrupt status quo, absolutely corrupt. What we shall be doing is this 47 minutes, 44, 48 minutes. We shall end this particular